Welcome to Growth Rings. My name is Carla Quinn. I'm a graduate of the coaching program, and I am currently on the board for CCO. Today, I have the privilege of hosting this Growth Ring learning event with Kris Indahl. Before we get further, I wanted to remind you that Zoom offers closed captioning. In the toolbar at the bottom, click on the CC icon live transcript and click on the box at the bottom to enable live transcription. If you have questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand. So CCO is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded by a group of experienced executive coaches and organizational leaders to unleash human potential through coaching and organizations. We unleash human potential by inspiring people to find their voice, supporting leaders to shift their mindset to solve big, complex, messy problems with grace and clarity. By growing leaders who bring the power of coaching into organizations and the community they serve, and by expanding access to coaching and organizations for all. So one way that we expand access is through our Growth Ring learning events. You can find our Growth Rings events and all other offerings on the events tab of our website. And if you're not on the mailing list, you can sign up there as well. We have a great newsletter that goes out regular-ish, and it's always chocked full with lots of interesting information, and I encourage you to sign up for that. I am excited to share that our cohort 9 is heading towards graduation in January. So that's huge. We have a couple of students in our audience today, and cohort 10 is kicking off in the spring. People find coach education through coaches. So you all are our best advertisements. And so if you have anyone who is considering becoming a coach, please point them our direction and maybe encourage them to go to an info session. Those are also out on our events calendar. Few more things that I'll mention is that we have our summit coming up in April. It's a great event. Typically we have about 12 speakers, and you get ICF and SHRM credits for those. So I will put a link in there for that. I also want to mention that today is Give to the Max Day. The best way to help us to expand coaching in organizations and in the world is by helping us out to provide scholarships and other ways to keep our organization moving forward. So please consider donating today. Without further ado, we will move on to introducing Miss Kris Indahl. Kris was one of the faculty when I was going through the program, and she continues to do that now, and she's a valued member of our CCO community. Kris has been a Cargill leader, has been a facilitator for Cargill leadership development program, and led and is a big part of the ECHO program. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kris, and we can jump into learning about how to help leaders with grief.
Well, thanks, Carla. Like I said, it's so great to see you all here, and I'm really grateful that you want to join in on the conversation today. I've designed this session to really be focused and geared towards coaches, but some of you might be leaders in organizations, some of you might be leaders in grief, some of you might be coaches in grief. So before I dive in with my thoughts, I kind of want to hear from you. So I'm going to ask you some questions. Can everybody see that I'm sharing my slide? Yeah. Okay, good. So first question. And since there's a lot of us, I'm just going to invite you to throw some answers in chat. Okay. So when you think of grieving leaders, what comes to mind? Leaders who have had significant loss and are in grief. Mhm. Yeah. So I'm just going to start sort of shouting them off here. Can't focus on yourself. Very true. They might be masking grief. Very true. Stress, invisible wounds. Priorities and knowing what is important. You keep it hidden, but it's really impactful. Trying to juggle it all. Difficulty sharing emotions in the workplace. Yeah. Focus. Yeah. Organizational change, like company reorg takeovers, major layoffs. Yeah. So grief related to the workplace. Yeah, everybody grieves and we need grace. Survival guilt, layoffs. Oh, husband died when you're in leadership role. Yeah. And later coach mom, later his mom just died. I'm sorry, Sydney.
It was a long
Um,
time ago.
sorry.
It was a long time ago. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, consistent living in a fog. How do we get through this? Lack of access to strengths, big one. Yeah, and challenges of just of the workforce, the way we're set up to handle bereavement leave. That's a little beyond the scope of today, but that is really important. So yeah, you guys, you're getting the sense of what it's like to lead while you are grieving. So as you think of, this is the second question for you guys, as a coach, if you are a coach, or if you're somebody who works with other leaders and wants to be helpful for them, and you are heading into a conversation with somebody who's just had a major loss, what comes up for you? What emotions might you be feeling? Like terror is fair game. Complete empathy is fair game. Anything. Yeah. Compassion, my own grief. Yeah, it can be really triggering. So we're going to maybe get to a chance to talk about that. Yeah. Refeeling my own sorrow. Nervous and empathetic. I think that kind of sums it up, Abby. Sort of like there's this both and going on, like, I'm not sure what this is going to be and what's it going to bring up for me. And I know loss and I might be projecting onto them. So there's all sorts of stuff that can be going on here. Culturally, leaders, I'm just going to read this, are expected to be back in the saddle, short time. And when I discovered they had fairly recent loss, my empathy and compassion skyrockets. Yep. Yeah, and often the leader doesn't always know they're being affected by grief. That's a really important piece that we're going to be talking about today. So you guys are good coaches, I can already tell. Here's my last question for you. You guys all came here for a reason. And I'd love to make this as effective of a session and time as possible for you. So what would be the most helpful thing for you to get out of today? If you could walk away with one thing, what would be helpful? Again, just throw your thoughts in the chat. So we have a coach who's maybe looking at this as a niche of working with people in grief, especially women leaders. Awesome. Yeah, so what would be helpful for me to know? about coaching someone after a major loss. So Anne, I know you have to leave at the top of the hour, but there will be a recording of this, and we're going to get to that a little later. You'll want to tune into the recording. Tips and techniques on how to open up the space. Oh, beautiful. Is there a hidden secret? Oh, of course there's a hidden secret. Tips and tricks. I love it. So greater awareness of how I can best hold space. Yeah. Helping clients to be clear on what they need, how to ask for it. Oh, so many good things. How to advocate for those grieving and how to coach others to advocate for themselves. Oh, that's a great one, Melissa. So many good questions. Carla, I want to make sure, are we saving this chat so that if there are questions that I don't get to today, I can go back to and share out. Okay, perfect. And then last request, Carla, I mentioned to the early folks who are here, I am not always effective at monitoring the chat when I'm in the flow of my thinking. So if there's something out there that I'm not catching, would you be sure to bring that to my attention? Awesome. Thank you. All right. So thank you for answering those questions. I think that will kind of helps me to know where you guys are at and kind of gear towards those things that you have questions about. So let's get into this, shall we? Today, here's my agenda. This is what I put together for us. I'm going to talk a little bit about grief. I'm going to talk a little about grieving leaders and what makes them unique. And I'm going to talk about how to support your clients in grief. And so here's a spoiler alert. Here's this for you, Anne, or anybody else who has to leave a little early. They need grief education. That helps a lot. They need witnessing. Tell me a little bit about what you lost and what this is like for you. They need ways to regulate themselves, regulate their emotions. They need time to process and explore. And they need to find meaning after significant loss for their life. Because after a big loss, the big question is, who cares about anything anymore? So those are the biggies. And what I wanted to tell you and why I'm sharing these now is I just wanted to give you a little heads up that I've designed this session to actually give you some of these things so that you can walk away with, oh, how do you do that? Well, hopefully you'll experience a little bit of these today. And if we have time, the last thing we'll talk about is how you support yourself as a coach for doing this work, because this can be big stuff. So we may or may not have time for that. We'll see how it goes. All right, so let's get into grief a little bit. Y'all know a little bit about grief, so I'm not going to go into all the different kinds of grief, although I could talk hours and hours about this stuff. In its essence, grief is the emotional response to loss. Okay. And there's a variety of kinds of loss, right? The biggie is death. Death of someone really important to you, like a parent, like a partner, a spouse, like a child, like a dear friend, like a pet. It could also be not death related, but the loss of a significant relationship in other ways, like divorce, or any kind of estrangement, right? It could be the death or the loss of a job. People's identity is really wrapped into their jobs and their careers. It could be the loss of your health or the loss of a loved one's health due to a diagnosis or an accident. It could be the loss of a lifestyle, meaning things like moving house, moving across town, moving across states, moving to other countries, like some of us might be thinking about these days. It could be due to empty nesting. Your kids are all gone. It could be the loss of your normal life due to a pandemic. And so there's all sorts of things that are micro losses and macro losses that cause grieving. The truth is, it's a part of life. It's just a part of life, universal. And I want to sort of just do a disclaimer now that because of the work that I do with leaders, and it revolves mostly around the loss of a loved one, you're going to hear that slant today. But all of these are valid, important, gutting losses. And so I just invite you to like do any inner translation that you might need that resonates for you about what we're talking about today. If your loss doesn't fit into these categories, or if it doesn't fit into the loss of a loved one, that's sort of the way that I'm working. And so you're just going to hear that today. So a couple aspects of grief that I want to share. It's a journey. There's no start and stop. It's a lifelong event or process. And it's as individual as each of us. You know, it's as individual as the person that we lost, because our relationship with them was unique, or it's as unique as the situation that you're in. And the final thing I'll say about grief is the loss shapes the grief. Who you lost, how you felt about them, how it happened. It shapes how you go about your grieving process. And that's another reason that grief is all unique. Oh, am I not sharing my slides?
Yeah, I see him.
Oh, okay, weird. Got it. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to ask you a question. If you can come on screen, I would love it, because I'm going to do the old school hand raising. So how many of you yourselves have experienced significant loss? Yeah. Most of you that I can see. Thank you for coming on screen, everyone. And a few of you who are using the the tech hand raising. Yeah, thank you. Okay, you guys can put your hands down. How many of you believe the notion that time heals all wounds?
Nope.
I see some head shaking, but I heard somebody speak. Did somebody have something to say?
Yeah, I might have. I didn't realize I took myself off mute, but I probably went like, I'm not so sure, right? Like, jury's out. Is what I probably.
Yeah. Well, here's my perspective. It's true to some extent, but time alone doesn't do the trick. And so there's a way of thinking about grief that actually comes from Dr. Lois Tonkin. And it goes something like this. If you think about life, your life as your jar. Is my hand raised? Did I do that on purpose? Whoops. Okay. If life is your jar, this is your life, right? And this rock is your grief. What happens is, you know, when we first go through a loss, that grief takes up like most of your jar, right? It can feel like your entire life is filled with grief. And most people think that that rock is going to get smaller over time, that your grief will actually shrink. But for many who've gone through significant loss, what can feel more true is that grief doesn't shrink. It actually stays the same. However, we grow a bigger jar. So what I'm trying to say about this is that your grief can some days be as present, as big, as debilitating as it was day one. And over time, you move on to other things in life because there are ways that you grow around your grief. And you can go through your life, creating a new life that actually includes the loss. So what I want to do now is, while I get my slides ready, I'm going to share my screen again. So that's sort of the representation of growing around our grief. So I'm going to invite you guys, we're going to do a little individual reflection here. And grab a piece of paper and something to write with. And I'm going to invite you to think about your own personal loss for a second. And then after this individual reflection, I'm going to have us do some sharing in a breakout session, breakout rooms, because it's important, as you saw, to witness grief and have your grief witnessed. So here's the deal. It's a challenge by choice. Do what you're comfortable with, while still getting something out of today. So think about a personal loss. Think about things that you have a grief around. And if you don't have a personal loss, or you don't want to share it, imagine a loss instead, or share the loss of someone else's grief that you can talk about. And then go ahead and draw it. So what do I mean by draw it? So we'll draw your jar with the rock in it. So the rock stays the same. Draw the jar where you were at the beginning of grief, and draw the jar of where you are now. And then label them. And then jot down some things that come to mind that have helped you grow your jar. Okay, so we'll just take a couple of minutes and do that. I should have had some music ready. All right, so what I'd like to do now is to invite you into a breakout room. And if you're comfortable doing so, share with your partner. You'll just be with one other person. There'll probably be one room with three. Share what or who you lost, and a little bit about your own grief journey. Share your picture of your jars and your rocks, and share a couple things about what helps you go from here to there. Okay? Questions for me before I open the rooms? All right. Go ahead and head on out. We'll just have 5 minutes.
Looks like Carissa is alone, so I'm going to join her.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Hi, Annie. Let's see. We're doing a breakout room. Did you get a breakout room? Annie, can you hear me? Okay. Oh, shoot. Oh, shoot. Oh, I didn't. Hmm. Hmm. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Everybody's going to be back in just a little bit. So I'd love to just popcorn out. What was that like for you? If anybody would be willing to just share briefly. Yeah.
I will.
No.
Sino is my name.
So no, thank you.
First of all, that wasn't enough time.
Yeah.
Second of all, it'd be nice to know how long you gave us so that we could divide it up. I took more than my share of time and we dropped our conversation stopped in the middle of a tough sentence. And so just a tip.
Yeah.
In terms of the facilitation, it would have been nice to know how long and we could have
I appreciate that.
differently. But I didn't have a jar. In my loss, I had a giant hole in my chest.
Yeah.
A giant hole. And so a jar is sort of out there. The hole was in here. And slowly through the last 14 years, it's just gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So there's hope and I have a good life and optimistic and all that kind of stuff. But it was devastating at the time. And so the hole was really big.
Yeah. Well, thank you for chiming in. I appreciate that. Let's hear from maybe one more person. What was it like to share about your loss?
It's always helped me to be able to talk about my loss. And it went from tears to be able to talk about it to I can talk about it. I look back at things that it was my mom. My mom had an interstitial lung disease. And when we had our final meeting or final checkup with her doctor, he said, I can't do anything more. So that day when he told me, go home, take her home and see, just have her live her best life. And my life, her life became my life. And my mom and I were close anyway, but being that caretaker became very difficult. I call it that you're in the obligation because you get to a point where it's just so overwhelming and so much that it becomes an obligation. But I was able to, and with therapy and some really good meds, I've been able to get balanced again. And this was in 2023, and I was just able to come back to work on a full-time basis as of Monday. And I've been fired from 4 jobs because I couldn't manage it.
Right.
And it has definitely been a challenge. And I know that, I'm not going to carry on any further, but my life has become my life now. Yeah. And so the grief has lessened. Yeah. And to talk about it is painful. Yeah. But I'm healing from it. So
thank you. I really just want to thank you. Well, thanks for sharing your story, Kris. I'm really sorry. And this speaks to what people are going through. Yeah. It's painful to share. I don't know if you saw, I put a link down. I put a post out on LinkedIn yesterday. I heard someone say, I really want to come to Kris's talk, but I'm afraid I'll cry the whole time.
And yeah,
we might cry. I'll probably cry.
I have become a professional crier. I can cry at any drop of the hat. Yeah. If anybody needs someone to cry with, I'm your girl.
Yeah, I live with Kleenex on my desk. It's
I know.
But here's the deal. It's part of what we need to heal. And when I say heal, like recognize, I know like there may never be full life back normal healing, but it's a process, and we're going towards that. It is a part of life. Yeah. And so what leaders need, this is a part of what leaders need. They need to be witnessed and share where they are and what has helped them. So I thought I would share, this might be a time for me to share my story because I realize I haven't done that yet. And so these are my jars. This was me back when my son, Ben, was actually diagnosed with brain cancer at age 12. We knew it was a very fast growing tumor, and we were told he would have maybe 6 months, maybe 12. And we got 13. He died in October of 2018. And so that was, I mean, I couldn't, if you could make a rock go out of the jar, that's what I was trying to depict here. It was everything, was flattened, and stayed there for a long time. But what has helped me grow my jar, so this is my jar today. And as you can see, it's the same size. And every once in a while, I absolutely feel like this. His birthday, which happens to be on Halloween, which was just recently his birthday, which was November 17th, which was Sunday. I go here. But most days I live around it, around here. And the things that have helped me are things like my mom's group. I think Carolyn Kinzel is on the call. I'm not sure if she's still here or not, but she leads an organization called Brighter Days Grief Center. And they have incredible resources for, well, hi, Sarah Kardashian. I just saw your heart. I didn't see you here earlier. They have incredible resources, including groups specific to loss, parents, children. I don't even know all the things, but so they have a specific mom's group that I'm in. They have a specific dad's group that my husband's in. It's huge. It's huge to have community. Leaders need that too. Grief therapy, coaching. I have done my own individual work. Grief education. I became a certified grief educator and I'm certified grief coach because there came a time where I'm like, I can't do what I do. I've been a coach since 2009 without bringing this in. It was just, it just felt like you must do this. And so that's been really helpful. Lots of cool podcasts and books that I can share later, but so it's a combination of being in life and taking time to be in the loss, which most of us really don't want to do, if we're honest. The long story short is I really came to bringing this work in. I'm an executive coach, so I work with leaders all the time. And I did some soul searching, as people do when they go through significant loss, thinking, what do I want to do next? Do I want to work as an executive coach? Are they the ones that need me most? Or should I be working with other people? So I went through a bunch of questioning. And the end of the day, I like working with leaders. I love working with smart people who have impact and reach. And what I know is working while you're grieving is just freaking brutal. It's just brutal and debilitating. And so if they are debilitated, think about all the impact that they have on others. And what we know from research is that leaders who are able to have a healthy relationship with grief are more connected to their hearts, which is the place that I love to play in with leaders. They're more open to possibilities. So this is really important work to me. So let's shift a little bit and talk a little bit about what makes leaders unique. So I'll just sort of couch this by saying every group of us have unique grief requirements and needs. You know, as a mother who's grieving, I'm going to look different than a dad who's grieving, than a sister who's grieving, or a child who's grieving. And leaders are no different. They have specific needs, and they're all the same as us, right? They have all these same needs and some more. So before I kind of share what I know, I'd love to hear what you guys know about what do you think is unique about grieving leaders? We talked a little bit at the beginning of at the top of the call, but what is unique? Any ideas?
Can we say it verbally?
Yeah, just throw it out.
Yeah, their decision making, as
Mhm.
leaders can be making a lot of decisions, can be driven by what's going on internally with their grief. So
Yeah.
those drivers can have a ripple effect on their organizations and surroundings.
Right. Yep. Good. What other thoughts do you think? They don't have.
They might have a sense of responsibility that's different as a leader in terms of making decisions or getting results or taking care of other people or being in control. I mean, it certainly depends on the person, but
Mhm.
all those kinds of things might mean they put other people before them. Could mean not, or it could mean they just block the grief.
Yeah.
So they don't feel it the same way.
Yeah, that's a really big one. And in fact, that is the first thing that I want to talk about. So,
Would you like me to share a couple of the comments in the chat?
Oh, yeah, please do.
Yeah, so we have a couple of good comments. People leaders impact others whether they mean to or not.
Mhm.
Leaders do not have a big circle around them to share.
Mhm.
Some leaders might not feel that they can be as vulnerable and might mask their grief more than is healthy.
Yeah.
And one more, I think there's a notion that if you show up and don't have it all together and are messy, aka feeling you're not capable as a leader.
100% true, all of them. And it all leads to this isolation feeling, right? Just to back up a little bit. So when I became really interested in this, I started having this program sort of formulate in my brain, because a lot of what I do in addition to coaching is leading leadership programs. And so I'm building a program called Leading While Grieving. And as a part of that, I decided I would interview leaders who were experiencing grief. And so what I'm about to share with you are the themes that were really resonatingly clear and obvious from my interviews. And I interviewed like 15 to 20 people, which may not seem like a lot, but on the one hand, but on the other hand, knowing leaders in grief who are willing to talk with you about it, I feel like that was a nice sampling of people who are willing to do that. So the deal is this: what I heard resoundingly is the things you're talking about. Leaders go it alone. They tend not to ask for help. Not one of the leaders I talk to, not one is working with a therapist. Not one has read a book. They might have one trusted person that's a friend, most typically a spouse. Could I ask you guys, I'm sorry, I would love for you to always be able to chat and be live, but if you could mute your phone or mute your lines right now, that'd be great. And then I'll open it up for questions later. What I will say about this is, because of them wanting to go it alone and only having usually one, maybe trusted person, is as a coach, this is a place where you can really be helpful, because they might be talking to you and literally nobody else. So just know that. They also tend to be the people who are the ones in their families that are holding it together. They're going to be the ones that are making the funeral arrangements and navigating sibling disputes. So they're carrying an even heavier load than normal. And then the last thing I'll say is, just to reiterate, I'm not sure who said it earlier, is they don't want to share their feelings for a couple of reasons. Like, they don't want to fall apart in a business meeting, and they don't want to make people uncomfortable. And so there's this great quote from Will Reeves, who is Christopher Reeves' son. And it was right after he'd lost both of his parents within a couple of years apart. And he talks about it and he said, you know, the happier I appeared on the outside world, the better I was received. And that's just exactly the way it is with leaders. So huge isolation, huge opportunity for coaches to be the companion while somebody's in their grieving journey. The second key theme I heard around was the compartment. So what do I mean by this? Leaders can be master compartmentalizers. They don't want to or can't deal with it now. And so if they can't deal with it, it goes into the compartment. In fact, one of the leaders said to me that I talked to, she said, on top of everything else, I have to be human. No, that's going into the compartment. That's going over there. So burrowing into work is something that they tend to do as leaders. It's a lot easier than falling apart. Here's the deal. I want to say something about that because the truth is it can be great to have a distraction. And that's true for anybody in grief, right? It's the staying in the distraction that is part of the problem and will actually elongate your healing. So I want to share, before I go into the other couple, I want to share this model. I call it the zigzagging model, but it's actually based on Strobe and Schutz's dual processing model. And here's what they say. You know, we have times when we're in our grief, when we're doing our grief work, when we're grieving, when we're feeling sad, we're yearning for what was. We have times when we'll allow that intrusion of grief in, and we're breaking the bonds with what was. That's the grief work, right? And then we have this restoration-oriented work, which really means engaging with normal life. It's attending to work challenges and home challenges that come up. It's doing new things and learning new things. It's a distraction from grief. And here's what we know. You don't stay over here forever. You don't stay over here forever. It really looks like this. You zigzag between these two states. And that is how you begin to integrate your grief. And so when leaders say, look, I just want to get on with things. I don't have time for this. They're really saying, I'm sticking over here and I'm just going to put it over here and not think about it. I had a client who said, what good does it do to feel sad? What good does it do? Doesn't do me any good, doesn't do my people any good, doesn't do my family any good. Here's the problem. Then that's when grief comes out sideways. That's when, people start snapping and making bad decisions or, doing things that are hurtful and having an impact that they don't really want. Okay. So let's talk about the next piece, which is the lack of predictability. So with leaders, think about this for just a second. Those of you who work with leaders, they are people who really like to have control and predictability in their lives, and they tend to be really good at it, and they've been well served by having that. But grief hits unexpectedly. Doesn't have a start or a stop. And there are many, many secondary losses that bring up new grief. Losing my son was hard enough at the age of 13. But watching all of his friends graduate a year or two ago was brutal. All new grief. And so it hits you out of the blue. That wasn't an anniversary. That wasn't a birthday. Totally took me by surprise. It probably shouldn't have, but it did. So you just can't control what's going to hit you. The truth is when you have a loss, like a death of a loved one, you don't just lose them in that moment. You lose them in all the years and all the moments that were supposed to be there and are not. So predictability is not available in grief. The final thing I want to talk about with leaders is something you guys have been alluding to, which is kind of a catch-all term that I use, is grief brain. It's not a term that I use, so I want to be clear about that. But grief brain is, it's real. It's actually included in the spectrum of post-traumatic stress disorder. So from the brain's perspective, all highly stressful events, like surviving a disaster, being fired, divorce, our brain sees them in the same way. And it's a form of emotional trauma. Okay. So think about leading. You know, leaders need to function at a fairly high level to do that job well, which is kind of a stretch for most of us on good days. So when you enter grief, it becomes even harder. So grief brain is all about, it affects you in crazy ways, like memory. Oh my gosh. I call it my Swiss cheese brain. It's like big gaping holes. Executive functioning. You're not great at making decisions. Attention. Hard to pay attention. And the speed of the way you process changes as well. So for a leader who is expected to use their executive functioning and make good decisions and remember key information, it can really undermine your confidence, right? So here's the deal. Grief profoundly changes us. Significant loss profoundly changes us. And you're really different coming through it. You're just different now. And you never may go back to the original jar. But here's the other thing. Grief has the option, the invitation, I think of it, to transform you. And that is the focus of the work that I do, is really getting leaders to get to a point that will allow grief to transform them into what's next for them. So how do you do that? Well, I just wanted to say that timing matters. This isn't something that you do when you're in acute grief, right? Acute grief, so I'm just going to go through these elements really quick. Since I started with acute grief, I'll just share that. Acute grief is what you go through right away after the loss, right? It's the first few weeks or months after you have a big loss. It can feel like nothing matters. I don't care. I don't want to live. Who gives a shit? So as a coach, your job here in acute grief is witnessing, being with. This is where you bring in all the empathy, all the love, because they're just in it, right? There's not a lot that's possible here in my experience, other than just being in it. And that's big, really big. Backing up, the anticipatory grief is really important to think about as well. This is the kind of grief that, you might see you might experience as you see your parents aging, or if you have a loved one or yourself with a diagnosis and a bigger loss is coming. Okay. Again, you're kind of in it, and witnessing is important here. Presence, yeah, the only way out is through. Presence is your superpower here. So then moving on to early grief. So this is the grief within, like, I would say the first year-ish, 2-ish years. And you're really grappling with how to live with your grief. And at some point during this stage, people decide, like, okay, I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to get off the couch. And might be left with a question like, now what? I'm ready, but, do I want to go back to what I was doing? I don't know. What kind of leader do I want to be now? Do I even want to be a leader anymore? Do I want to go off and be a potter? It can be all sorts of things that happen here. And then mature grief is really where we stay for the rest of our life. And we have grown our jar because time will do that alone. But there's all sorts of other things that could be happening. And it's hopefully where we've started to integrate grief, where we find more love than pain. And it can be a place of transformation as well. We're ready for it here. So I'm just going to stop and ask questions. Any questions that you have so far before I go into how to support clients in grief? And just come off mute and ask any questions that you might have. And if there aren't any, that's fine too.
Kris, it's Jennifer. Can you just say like the coach's focus again? Because I heard anticipatory. It was present, cute was empathy, and I missed the last two. Did you have a?
Yeah, well, we'll go through those actually. That's really what's coming next. I appreciate that question. Yeah, what I really wanted to make the point is the what I'm about to share with you. These first two are kind of not the time for it. Okay. And a few months in, couple years in, that's where this work will make sense. Okay. So yeah, great question. All right. So let's talk about how do we support clients in grief? So I alluded to this earlier today. Education. Helping clients understand what happens in grief can just sort of settle their minds. So I'm curious, what have you guys learned today that you might use? You can put it in the chat. What would you use? Anything that you've learned today that you could actually use with a client starting today? Grief stages, okay. The jar heart analogy and draw the picture. Perfect. The zigzag model, I'll just throw that out there. That's helpful. Grief is a journey. Yep. And even the stages in terms of the timeline. So those are pieces that can be super helpful. Some neuroscience around what grief does to our brain with Grief Brain. Yep. Yeah. A lot of people, it's a really, I didn't feel this way. So it was out. It's been interesting to me to hear this from a lot of clients, but people think they're going crazy when they are in grief. And so you might hear that. And grief education can really squelch those fears. You're not crazy. This is normal. This is it. This is the work. This is the state you're in. So, yes, and it's individual. This is as individual as the loss. Cool. So what else do they need? They need you to witness. So before I jump into more thoughts around this, what have you learned today around witnessing? Like what feels important around witnessing that you might bring to your clients? Grief is real. The importance of just being with the client where they are. Yep. Looking forward and seeing what education be shared. Ask them to share what it's like for them. Yeah. Yes. Empathy. You might be the only person who was witnessing. Don't rush them. I'm so glad you brought that in. That's really what I was trying to get at with the where are you? You can't do this work too quickly. That's right. Sit with them in the hard feelings. Yep. Yep. Naming the loss, giving space to identify what they're feeling. Oh, see how smart you guys are? Yeah. Acknowledging the loss with compassion, honoring what they're feeling. Here's the thing, it can be really like people shy away from talking about grief and loss. People shy away from it. And don't be afraid to talk to them about it. It's normal to shy away from it, but by acknowledging it, you make it clear to them that it's important, and they may not be willing to talk about how important it actually is, or maybe even aware of how important it is. Even like smaller losses is where I would think about that playing out, right? And not to compare losses, because that's not helpful. But when people think about, oh, well, my cat died, and yeah, I loved him, and he was sort of my everything because whatever, but it's just my cat, right? There will be people who will let that take over. But it's important, and acknowledging it makes them be willing to talk about it too, because they're bewildered too. Nobody talks about grief. Nobody teaches us how to go through it. They're in the dark. And so it's helpful for you to do that with compassion, which means really honoring their feelings. It's important to say their names and invite them to share their memories. It can really be beautiful when somebody asks you about your person. Again, you're hearing my slant of that is the loss, but ask someone, tell me your favorite memory about Ben. Tell me your favorite memory. When was he a total shit that you made you laugh? What still makes you laugh today? Yeah, lots of those stories. It can actually be, so I want to sort of put some caution around what I'm about to say, but it can actually be helpful to very briefly refer to your own loss. Because by doing that, you're actually communicating that you understand the power of grief. Remember, it's not about you. It's your client's experience that's most important. And never say, I know how you feel, because even if you've had the exact same loss, you don't know how they feel, right? But there's some street cred that you can get by saying, yeah, I've had some loss too. So bottom line with witnessing, again, presence is your superpower. You all know as coaches how to be present. All right, what else do they need? Emotional regulation.
Kris,
Yeah.
can I just share
The chat? Yeah, thank you.
There's a lovely comment in the chat. A powerful question I ask clients is, what was the person they are grieving laugh like? What was their laugh like?
Oh, nice. I love that. Yeah, it's beautiful. So the emotional regulation is a big part of working with anybody in grief, but because of leaders not willing to go there, a lot of the reason is I don't know that I'll ever come out of it. I don't want to cry in public. I need tools to help me manage all the feels that I'm having. And so I wanted to give you guys a tool today that I use all the time in my work. And that is called RAIN. Have any of you heard of RAIN? I see some nods. Yep. I use this in small ways and big ways. And I just thought that we might go through this today. So the RAIN is an acronym that stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And this isn't mine. This comes to me by Tara Brach. I'm not sure if it's hers either, but she uses it all the time. And I'm gonna invite you to do a meditation with me for the next 5 minutes or so. And I'm gonna go through this process with you. And so I'm gonna invite you to just mute your mute your line and go off video. I'm not gonna mute mine, but I'm gonna go off video too. And just to sort of model that. And for this meditation, I'm going to invite you to bring to mind someone or something that you've lost or that you imagine you're losing. It could be a friend, a family member, a precious pet. It could be a job or a lifestyle or your health or anything else. So just allow yourself to settle in and go ahead and close your eyes if you're willing to do so. And just begin by arriving in this moment and just take a few deep breaths. And then allow your breathing to come back to normal. And feel the weight of your body and whatever you're sitting on. Tune in to all the ambient sounds around you. You may not have heard yet. Notice your chest rising and falling with each breath. And just arrive. And now allow to come into your consciousness that which you have lost or that you imagine losing. Allow, let's say it's a person. Allow that person to show up with images and sounds and sensations. Just simply welcome any images or pictures in your mind and welcome any sensations that come up for you. You may notice that these images are sort of form as memories. And as you welcome these memories, you may notice the feelings that arrive with them. So the R of rain stands for recognize. Recognize and name what feeling is here. Often the feeling that comes with grief is sadness or melancholy, yearning. That sadness might be mild, might be quite strong. Just sort of take a minute and identify what's here. And if you can, name it. Go ahead and name it. There may be more than one emotion. For now, just choose one to focus on. And just allow that emotion to be here. So the A of rain stands for allow. Just allow whatever feeling is here to be here just as it is, without trying to fix it or holding it at bay like a beach ball underwater. Just allow it to be here. And notice any sense and sensations in your body. It might be a pressure in your chest or throat. You might notice some heat or temperature. Where are you feeling that? And as feelings come up, just allow them here. This is how it is right now. This is how you feel right now. So the I of rain stands for investigate. So without judgment and with curiosity, just notice how you're experiencing this feeling. What wants most attention? What are you believing that's creating this feeling? What does this feeling most need from you? So the N of rain stands for nurture. What do you need in this moment? What can you give yourself, say to yourself, that would feel comforting? So we just experiment here. It might be words like, this hurts. Might be words like, it's going to be okay. It's not your fault. It may be physical touch, like putting a hand on your heart or wrapping your arms around yourself in a hug. Or maybe even like visualizing yourself in warm, radiant light and love. So as we bring this meditation to a close, notice where you are now. This is a meditation that you can do over and over, even on the same loss. So take a deep breath in with appreciation for yourself, and when you are ready, and come back, open your eyes and come back to our session. So I hope that that gives you both something for yourself as well as something you can bring into a client session. I know in one of our courses, we talk to coaches about the the coaching skill of doing it now when you're in a session. This is a do it now type of skill. You can bring this in anytime a client seems to be really struggling with any kind of big emotion. And this is really useful in grief. How are we doing on time? Oh my goodness. All right. Well, let me just wrap up with a couple of other pieces that clients need. Processing grief. When they're ready, they are able to talk through and process their emotions. A key area that I play around with here with clients is in the past, present, and future. So that can look like what was lost and what is left and what's possible. And those three questions alone are huge.
Kris, there's a good question in the chat.
How do you think about the boundary between coaching and therapy with a tool like this? RAIN is a common tool used by therapists. Yep. So want to be mindful of remaining in the role of coaching. Yeah, it's a great question. Therapy and coaching are like this, right? They have a lot of overlap. I think of tools like this as completely fair game for coaching. Like I mentioned, I use it all the time, and my clients find it exceptionally helpful to simply process in the moment and find a way forward in this moment, giving what they need to themselves. It's actually a tool for building agency as well as processing emotions. So I don't know that I have a great answer for your question other than there's a lot of overlap. I learned of this tool from a therapist, in full disclosure, and I use it all the time. So I think there's overlap. And if other coaches have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Or you can throw it in the chat.
I would just add that Tara Brach has that online for anyone to listen to at any time. So it doesn't feel like it's not owned by the therapeutic trade. And what you were saying, Kris, is I think where we overlap most in therapy and coaching is in the nowness of it.
Mm,
So we both work in the nowness. And so rain is a nowness.
that's a
That's-
beautiful way to talk about it, Anne. Thanks. One note in this processing bucket is just a heads up that guilt is an emotion that is always present in grief. According to David Kessler, who wrote the book Finding Meaning, among others, even if you had nothing to do with the loss. So I didn't cause my son's cancer. I didn't cause him to die, but and I know I couldn't have done more. I know what he had was not a thing that could have been cured by anything I did. And yet it's an irrational piece. And so it might be a place for you to go with your clients, whether that's present for them or not. Yeah. Last thing I will say is this finding meaning piece is important. This is further down the road in grief. But this is a place to play with leaders because acts of service, helping others is a really important part of finding meaning somehow, some way. And it can be a place to talk about, who do you want to be now? What kind of leader do you want to be? How do you want to bring in this humanity that you have experienced like everybody else? How do you want to bring this to your team or your organization? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and just open it up to asking you all, like, what's going on with you now? I know I've talked a lot today, and hopefully you've had a chance to glean some stuff. But I know that we wanted to open it up for questions. And so I want to make sure you have time to ask any questions that you have.
I want to hear questions too, but first I just want to look at these beautiful faces because Kris, you've touched all of our hearts. We're all kind of like, I know I'm feeling really tender, so thank you.
Oh,
I want to hear questions too.
I appreciate that, Anne. Thank you. This is tender stuff. This is tender stuff. Mm. So what we haven't talked about today is how to support yourself as a coach. I'm just going to take a minute to talk about that. I'm going to just throw up one slide it feels so weird to be using slides with such a tender topic, but in the service of getting content out, I'll do that. So these are all the things, right? So I'll talk about them briefly. Self-awareness is really the most important place to start. And what I'll say about that is asking yourself a question. When you're working with somebody in grief, what is mine and what is theirs? You can't do this work for a client. They must go through this. And it also may trigger your own stuff around grief and loss. It may trigger lots of memories and feelings for you. So dip into the level 1 and ask yourself, what's mine? And then work through that in whatever way you work through things, whether it's with your own coach or journaling or whatnot. Your job is not to be in the hole with your client. Your job is to be on the side of the hole, cheering them on, being with them, and when they're ready to come out, be with them there as well. So if you do get triggered, find yourself a way to self-regulate in the moment. I actually often do RAIN really quickly in my head. Oh, what am I feeling? Name it. Sometimes you guys have all heard the name it to tame it. Sometimes simply naming the emotion diffuses it. Okay. I also would say that another way to regulate yourself is to have this perspective in mind. And this is helpful to me. And I just offer it. Take what works, leave the rest, right? There is a perspective that there are gifts in everything. I hold that to be true. Now, the gifts may not outweigh this horrible loss, but they still exist. And this person that you're working with just doesn't know about the gifts yet, or they are not in their consciousness yet. It can be helpful for you as a coach to stay grounded, to have that perspective. Okay. As a coach, find a community, find your own coach. If you do any work in this, that's key. I'm going to be doing a program where I'm working with leaders in this space. I will have my grief therapist coach person at the ready. I'll have that scheduled before I even go into this session. I know that I will want that for myself. So find your community, find your people, find a peer group, whatever works for you. And then self-care is more important than ever. This is all the things you already know how to do. You know, the exercise, eating right, getting enough sleep, do your mindfulness meditations. What I know is this is actually truly part of the job as a coach. You don't do this work well without doing that. And then finally, build your own grief literacy. And one way to do that is, I've got some resources here. I have it as resources for grieving leaders, but this is for really everybody, right? For leaders, I really think it's helpful to direct them to things that they already have and they know about, like an EAP or their in-network therapists. I mentioned Brighter Days Grief Center before. I include the National Hospice Organization helpline here because they're really good at giving resources around grief. And then there are 3 websites that I'm including here that 2 or actually all 3 are great grief education websites. And then grief.com is David Kessler's website, and he holds what does he call it? Well, they're online grief groups. I'm forgetting the name of them now, but so that's a really great resource great resource for both you and your people as well. All right, there we are. I just want to thank you for being here. And that's it. We're out of time. Thank you so much. I agree with Annie. It's been lovely to see your beautiful faces. Thank you so much for taking your lunch hour and an hour and a half at that to be with me and this conversation and all these beautiful people. I love you guys.